Good morning. Did you enjoy my new theme music this week? In children's ministry, we have a mystery to solve. We have a deadly plot, an unsuspecting son, and a servant who delivers a secret message. The kids will have a chance to make their own mystery theme music today and share it with one another. After that, they'll put their sleuthing skills to work as they dive into God's Word. The friendship we'll be looking at today is Jonathan and David. They relied on their love for God and for each other to solve this mystery and to save David's life. The kids will be given an opportunity to show God's love to a friend by creating just a decorative pen to give to them. As we go into our prayer time, the kids will use that pen as a focal point of their prayer. They will pray for the friend that they're going to give the pen to, and they will also pray for God to help them show His love to that friend. What I want to share with you today is that as we show God's love in our friendships, we are investing in eternity. And I had a friend who showed me God's love when I was in grade school. As we got older and got to know each other more, she'd invite me over to spend the night and go to church with her the next morning. Through that church body and through her family, I got an opportunity to see God, to know Him and His love. I will always be grateful to Mr. and Mrs. Fell for showing me God's love and for encouraging my friendship with their daughter. What are you doing to show God's love to your kids and to their friends and encourage those friendships? As you drive your kids around and pick up their friends and get to know them and ask them questions and listen to them and bring them to church with you, you are showing them God's love. You are making an eternal investment. My prayers go with you this week as you all show God's love to your friends.
We are gathered here today to pay our respects to someone who was dear to so many of us. Just as the Israelites wandered through the valley in search of bountiful
Hey, man. Nah, I can talk.
Watch out for falling squirrels. In the book of James, he asks the question, what is your life? And then he answers it by saying, a vapor. You're here for a second and then you're gone. But have you ever really thought about that? I mean, literally thought, this could be the last day of my life. Sometimes it's easier to take ourselves out of the equation and maybe think about one of our friends or family members. And I don't mean to be morbid here, but we all have friends or family who we would say their lives were cut short. And remember the shock of that moment. But I don't want to be disrespectful, but I want you to think about their memorial service and honestly ask yourself, while you were sitting there and hearing about their lives, did you really see them as people who invested their lives on earth for the sake of eternity? In other words, did they genuinely prepare themselves for that moment, knowing that, this stuff on earth, all it is an investment for the future? Did they live that way? And as you read this chapter, I want you to evaluate your life and think through, am I right now preparing for that day? Am I really preparing for eternity in heaven? Am I living in such a way that it shows that I really believe my life here on earth is just a vapor?
The kids are learning about Jonathan today downstairs, and we're going to be taking a look at Jonathan as well, but from a slightly different perspective. As we take a look at his life, I want to start out by looking at the end of his life. The Philistines attacked Israel. The man of Israel fled before them. Many were slaughtered on the slopes of Mount Gilboa. The Philistines closed in on Saul and his sons, and they killed 3 of his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, Malchishua. And when his armor bearer realized that Saul was dead as well, he fell on his own sword, and he died beside the king. I want to ask you something. What goes through your mind when I say that you might not finish this church service today? What do you think about with your life? If you look on the screen, there's a countdown to the end of the service. You would have 49 minutes and 8 seconds left to live. How would you respond? What goes through your mind? Do you think about how you've lived your life? Do you think about what's important, what's not important? Do things start to melt away? If you only had 48 minutes left, how would you spend those last 48 minutes?
I will follow you.
44 minutes left. What goes through your mind? My guess is you're not going to worry about getting the dishes cleaned that are stacked up at home. Suddenly, the tasks on your task list don't seem to matter anymore, do they? The things that were so important that it was bothering you when you walked in this morning suddenly melts away because you're not going to have the time to accomplish them. Accomplishments are good. Tasks aren't bad. Maybe your mind starts to go through some of the accomplishments that you've made in your life. And by that, I'm not talking about the number of times that you've washed the dishes or cleaned the house or changed the diapers. I'm talking about things that you look back on your life and you say, yeah, that was a defining moment. That was a good thing. Maybe you start to reminisce about those high points, those moments where you know that you made a difference in somebody's life. You know that you did something right. You know that God will look at you and say, well done, good and faithful servant, for that moment in your time. In Jonathan's last 43 minutes, he was at war. He was in the midst of a battle. He was out fighting. Something that Jonathan knew very well. This wasn't new to him. He grew up as a young man, trained by his father, King Saul, to be a warrior. Maybe Jonathan remembered the day that Saul selected 3,000 of his special troops from the army of Israel and sent the rest of the men home. He took 2,000 of the chosen men with him to Michmash, to the hill country of Bethel, and the other 1,000 went with Saul's son Jonathan to Gibeah, to the land of Benjamin. And soon after this, Jonathan attacked and defeated the garrison of the Philistines at Gibeah. The news spread quickly among the Philistines. Maybe as Jonathan was fighting that battle that final day, as he was dying, maybe he remembered the day that Dad entrusted 1,000 troops into his hands. And he led them well, and they won that day. Maybe he remembers another time, a little later, when they were all camped out and they were concerned about the Philistines, and he and his armor bearer went by themselves. They snuck up on the Philistines. Nobody knew that he was going to do this. His own father, Saul, didn't know that he was going to do this. But he felt led by God, and so he took his armor bearer and went. They got there, and he even did things right. He said, God, if you want us to go and attack, have the Philistines respond to us in this way. If you want us to go back to the camp, have the Philistines respond in this way. I put it in your hands. Whatever they say, I will take as a sign from you as to how I'm supposed to proceed. God gave the sign to attack. And so Jonathan, by himself, he and his armor bearer, that was it. They went in and they attacked. They took on a whole garrison of these guys. Not only did they kill them, but as they were fighting that battle, it frightened the Philistines so much that they started to run and started fighting against each other. And once again, Israel won that day. Maybe you think about accomplishments in your life, but Jonathan that day would have remembered, as Scripture tells us, the Lord saved Israel that day. What kind of days do you think about? What accomplishments? What times, victories together with God?
Every day. harder to put the words into action. I'm going to make mistakes, Father, but I'm going to trust you.
It's you I live for every
because
day.
You are God.
It's you I live for every day. It's you I live for every day.
And when I fall and make mistakes, I know that you will forgive me because it's you I live for
every day. It's you I live for every day. It's you I
your spirit inside me to help me because it's
you I live for every day. It's you I live for every day. It's you I live for every day.
And I have the power of every day.
Maybe you think about those accomplishments. Maybe you think about those high mountaintop experiences with God. Those moments where you just know that you did what you were supposed to do, you were living out what you were supposed to live out, that you were the person that you were intended to be. But it doesn't take long as we think about our lives to start recognizing the places where we didn't have those mountaintop experiences. Those places where we knew we weren't doing what God wanted us to do. Those places where we know that we failed. There's a reason that it's almost become trite to say to someone, get right with God before the end. Because you have 31 minutes and 47 seconds before you meet Him. What will you say? What will you think of then? When He looks at your life from start to finish, what will He say? How will He respond? Maybe you think about your mistakes. Places where you just totally blew it. You think about the low points just as emotionally as you think about the high ones. Maybe more. Because you realize that there's absolutely nothing that you can do to make up for the mistake that you made. There's absolutely nothing that you can do to justify what you did. You were just wrong. And you're going to face your Creator. And you're going to have to talk to Him about that. Jonathan certainly had moments like that as well. Out in the middle of battle, as he was raised to be a great warrior and eventually the king of Israel. And as he was out in the midst of that battle, his father made a proclamation one day. They were taking on the Philistines, and he didn't want the battle to end. He didn't want it to end until the Philistines were completely defeated that day. And so he said, no stopping for anything, no stopping for food, no stopping, just keep going in battle until we have won. And Jonathan stopped and got some food, not knowing that his father had made that proclamation. Not only that, his father had made the proclamation and said, anyone who does stop to eat will die. Later on, when the battle was over, and they were all coming back and celebrating a high point, an every day I'm walking with God kind of moment, they found out that Jonathan had broken Saul's command. Tell me what you have done, Saul demanded to Jonathan. I tasted a little honey, Jonathan admitted. It was only a little bit, and it was on the end of the stick. Does that really deserve death? Is that the defense you're going to go with to God? It was only a little bit. I only made a small mistake. I mean, it's not nearly as bad as everybody else. Does that really deserve death? Yes, Jonathan, Saul said, you must die. May God strike me and even kill me if you do not die for this. But the people broke in and they said to Saul, well, Jonathan has won a great victory for Israel. Should he die? Far from it. As surely as the Lord lives, not one hair on his head will be touched, for God helped him do a great deed today. And so, the people rescued Jonathan that day, and he was not put to death. When we face our Maker in a little less than 28 minutes, There is no excuse in the world that you can come up with that will stand up against His perfect justice, holiness, righteousness. And you can plead with Him all you want and say, does it really deserve death? I mean, all I did was, it wasn't that big of a deal. Yes, it does. He will say. And it is only through His Son that you'll have an advocate. It is only if Jesus is going to stand up for you that you will have someone who will take death away from you. There's no more to do except for to come to that advocate and ask Him. Ask Him that you may be saved. If I knew I only had 26 minutes left, if there was nothing else that I did during that time, I would make sure that I had gone to Jesus and said, I want you to be my Savior. I want you to be the Lord. I'm entrusting my life into your care. I believe you. I trust you. As we take communion, we remember what He offers us. The bread reminds us that His body was broken, the cup that His blood was poured out. And as we take it, we can remember that He paid every price that was necessary, even to death, so that you and I might live. If you have not come to Him yet, take this time to turn to Him. If I hadn't been baptized yet and I had 25 minutes left, I'd be looking for a pool of water somewhere to jump into. I wouldn't be wasting any time. And I would be crying out to Him, saying, I need you. Let's turn to Him now as we take communion. hopefully, during that last 60 minutes, you will recognize that it's not really worth the time to keep focusing on your mistakes and your shortcomings. You'll start thinking about beyond what you're going to be leaving behind. Who will still be here? Your friends, your neighbors, the relationships that you have built. And for Jonathan, to be sure, he would have thought about Saul, his father, who raised him to be a great warrior and king, which now he knows clearly is not going to happen because he's about to die. But there's someone who wasn't there that day, his best friend. And maybe you have a best friend like this. Someone who just understands you, gets you. Someone who that you know them well and they know you. As you start thinking about your best friend, I'm sure Jonathan would have been thinking about David. Because Jonathan, as he was becoming a great warrior and being trained by his father, met another young man who was very much of the same heart and spirit. A young man by the name of David. The day that they met was the day that the Israelite army was terrified by this giant warrior named Goliath. And they didn't know what to do because he would come out and taunt them, and he was over 9 feet tall. Huge sword and spear. And said, "Come on out and fight me." And this young man, David, came and was just a shepherd boy who looked at everything that was going on there and said, "Why are you afraid of him? Our God is far bigger than he is." David took a couple of stones and a sling, and he went out to fight against this giant warrior that day. As we all watched, Jonathan would have been in the crowd watching. He took his sling, he threw the stone right in the warrior's forehead. It knocked him out and knocked him down. And David didn't hesitate. He went like a true warrior and pulled the sword away from Goliath and cut off his head and brought the head to Saul to remind Saul that God is in charge, that he is the true king, and that he will strengthen anyone who walks with him. That's my kind of friend, Jonathan must have said. It was that day, right after that moment, that they met for the first time. David had finished talking with Saul. He met Jonathan, the king's son. There was an immediate bond between them. Of course, they both had hearts of warriors for God. And Jonathan loved David. From that day on, Saul kept David with him, wouldn't let him return home. And Jonathan made a solemn pact with David because he loved him as he loved himself. Just as the Levitical law says, "Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against a fellow Israelite, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." These are both men who wanted to walk with God. These are both men who were fierce warriors. These are men that were ready to take on anything that the Lord called them to take on in this life, so that God would be glorified in all things. These guys became best friends. And you could see why. I have to think that as he was facing his last 15 minutes, that Jonathan thought about David, his best friend. David wasn't in this war, not in this battle at this time. And so he was going to die next to his father, but he knew that David was going to be left behind. David was going to continue the fight. David was going to carry on the legacy of men who were men after God's own heart and were willing to fight to the very end, whatever God calls them to fight for. You think about friends, relationships, a legacy, how it will be passed on to the next person or the next generation. What will be passed on from you? How would you handle your inheritance that's going to go to someone in 14 and a half minutes? What would you use it for? Would you write up a will on a napkin before you died? We have an opportunity to give to the Creator of the universe, to our God. And that's what we're going to do right now. Would that giving be different if you knew you were going to leave this life in 14 minutes? Do we live our life with eternity in mind? The prayer requests that you wrote down on that card, would it matter? Or is it something that will carry on even if you're not here in 14 minutes? We're going to give to God. And as we give to Him, let's think of those eternal things. You know, there are times a lot that Frank and I will send text. Well, Frank just likes to send text to begin with, but there are times where Frank
Especially
and
at midnight.
Frank and I will send texts back and forth, and we're coordinating things and talking about and so forth. And when we're done with our texting back and forth, especially for coordinating ministry, I will often finish our conversation, or at least my part of our conversation, by texting him simply, "I'm glad we're in this together," or "I'm glad we're on a team together," to which he responds, "Me too." The relationships that we have in this life, especially relationships where we have a true bond in God through Christ, or even relationships where we know we are building Christ into someone else, that has impact. And that has impact that will outlast anything that we do while we're here. As Jonathan was dying that day and thinking about David, Jonathan knew that David was going to become the next king of Israel. God had already led them through a process. God had already made it clear to both of them that even though Jonathan was being raised up as the next king, trained as a fierce warrior, he wasn't the heir to the throne. And it changes the actions that we take during this life when suddenly we think in terms of empowering one more so that they can carry the torch, so that they will be maybe not the next king, but the next follower of Christ, the next gospel carrier, the next friend of God. Jonathan even saved David's life. Saul, Jonathan's father, wanted to kill David because he found out that David was going to become the next king, and Saul was not happy with that. Saul wanted to stay king as long as he could, and he wanted his son to become the next king, and nobody was going to stop that, not even God. I wonder if that's what he thought of when there were 4 minutes left before he died. God will not be mocked. God's plan will go on. And the only thing that we have control over is whether we will fight him or whether we will willingly work with him in accomplishing his plan. Jonathan spoke with his father about David, saying many good things about him. "The king must not sin against his servant David," Jonathan said. "He's never done anything to harm you. He's always helped you in any way that he could. Have you forgotten about the time that he risked his life to kill the Philistine giant and how the Lord brought a great victory to all of Israel as a result? You were happy about it then. Why should you murder an innocent man like David?" Jonathan said, standing up to his father. "There is no reason for it at all." So Saul listened to Jonathan and vowed, "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed." This wasn't the only time that he had to stand up against his father, because Saul would go back on his word and start going after David again. At one point, Saul got so angry at David and then so angry at listening to Jonathan that he threw a spear across the room right at his son. He missed. But he almost killed his own son. What kind of legacy would you leave behind in just under 2 minutes? What would your children remember your grandchildren, your best friends, your worst enemies. What would people say about you? Not at the funeral, because at the funeral everybody tries to silence their cell phones. Almost everybody. And they try to come up with something nice to say about you. When they leave the funeral home and they're not there trying to console the people who are closest to you, what do they say? As they're getting ready to go to the funeral home, what do they say? What kind of legacy will you leave behind? What is your impact on the world? Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn loyalty to each other in the Lord's name. The Lord is the witness of a bond between us and between our children forever." Then David left, and Jonathan returned to the town. So we were 20 minutes out. I'm sitting in the back here, and I have a friend here who swung by and said to me, "Pete, in 21 minutes, we're not all going to drink Kool-Aid, are we?" It was in the middle of communion, and it took everything I had not to say, "You already did." No, the timer is there to remind us that there really is a clock ticking. We don't know how long we have. We really don't know what we have left, so why not use it for the glory of God? Every minute I have, I want to use for His glory. Every moment I have, I want to cherish, looking forward to the eternity that I will have with Him. Look, time's up. You're still here, and so am I. So the real question is this: if He kept you here, why? What are you going to do with it? How are you going to live from this moment on?